They say common sense is a dying art. Well, tonight you're getting a front row seat at its funeral. And a quick heads up from our lawyers. This is a what not to do guide. These are historical screw-ups, so please don't try to get your own nomination. You've been warned. Now let's dive into the glorious chaos. 1. The Great Wall of Stupidity. Some neighbor disputes end with offense, some with a passive-aggressive Merry Christmas card. But when two grown men in the Midwest decided to lock horns over a 2-foot strip of lawn, it escalated into something worthy of a Greek tragedy, if the Greeks had cinder blocks and bad building skills. For months, these two had been waging an unspoken war, untrimmed hedges growing just a little too far over the line, garbage cans mysteriously rolling onto the other's driveway, and the occasional lawn ornament mysteriously migrating overnight. But then came the final straw. One of them trimmed a tree that he swore was on his property, while the other swore was sacred, untouchable territory. Voices were raised, threats were made. And our main character, let's call him Gary, decided the only solution was to build a wall. Not just any wall, but a towering 20-foot-high spite wall of solid cinder blocks, stretching the entire property line like a concrete middle finger to his neighbor. The problem? Gary was not a builder. His construction experience began and ended with assembling an IKEA bookshelf incorrectly. But why let lack of skill or engineering knowledge stop you when you've got righteous anger fueling your DIY ambitions? Armed with a rented cement mixer and an attitude, Gary went to work. No permits, no plans, and absolutely no thought about something boring like foundations or structural integrity. He stacked block after block, whistling smugly to himself, imagining the moment his neighbor would open the blinds and be greeted by a monolith of pure pettiness. By the end of the week, the wall was complete, ugly, uneven, and leaning ever so slightly, but standing tall enough to block the neighbor's view entirely. Gary would sit in his lawn chair, beer in hand, gazing at it like Michelangelo admiring the Sistine Chapel. Then came the rain. A solid week of heavy downpours turned the ground into a sponge. The dirt beneath Gary's masterpiece shifted. The already wobbly wall groaned under its own weight, swaying like a drunk uncle at a wedding. On the 7th day, Gary, wearing cargo shorts, flip-flops, and his proud World's Best Neighbor t-shirt, sat back in his chair to admire his work. Maybe he even snapped a selfie. And then, without warning, gravity filed for revenge. The entire multi-ton wall gave a final creak before collapsing forward in one single, glorious motion. The neighbor's view was no longer blocked. In fact, he now had a clear line of sight. Straight to Gary, pinned beneath the rubble of his own bad engineering. By the time emergency crews arrived, the wall was a pile of jagged concrete, the lawn chair was flattened, and Gary had become the first man in history to be memorialized by the very monument he built to annoy someone. The irony? The neighbor he hated so much didn't even hear the crash. He was on vacation. Gary's last great act of defiance had been witnessed by no one but the squirrels. 2. In a quiet Texas suburb, a man discovered an unusually large wasp's nest clinging under the wooden beams of his porch, a buzzing gray fortress that had clearly been there for some time. To most people, this would be an obvious call an exterminator situation, but not to him. He saw it as a challenge, a test of ingenuity, courage, and the mistaken belief that he was both smarter and faster than thousands of stinging insects. After a quick brainstorming session that probably lasted less than a minute, he decided the most efficient solution wasn't insecticide or protective gear, but fireworks. Specifically, several high-powered aerial rockets left over from 4th of July celebrations. His plan was simple in theory and catastrophic in practice. He would tape the rockets to the end of a long metal pole, maneuver the makeshift bomb directly under the nest, light the fuses, and retreat to safety while the fireworks obliterated the wasps in a blaze of patriotic glory. The pole was prepared with layers of duct tape, the rockets fixed in a tight bundle pointing in what he believed was the correct direction. He crouched under the porch, muttering about precision and timing, and with a lighter in one hand began to ignite the fuses. The wasps, sensing trouble, started to stir. But the real threat wasn't their tiny stingers. It was his complete lack of spatial awareness. In his rush to light all the fuses at once, He had accidentally rotated the pole so that the rockets were aimed not at the nest, but directly back toward his own torso. A split second after ignition, the bundle erupted with a shrieking roar, the combined thrust transforming the pole into a rocket-propelled spear. It shot backward with incredible force, impaling him through the chest before detonating in a concussive blast of sparks, fire, and shrapnel. The explosion tore through his shirt, igniting fabric and flesh, while the shockwave knocked loose parts of the porch above. Neighbors who heard the blast ran outside to find smoke rising from under the deck, bits of charred duct tape fluttering in the air, and the man lying motionless amid the debris. The wasps, miraculously unharmed, swirled angrily around the smoking remains of their home, entirely victorious. His elaborate plan had managed to kill only one living creature that day, himself, leaving behind a cautionary tale about the dangers of overconfidence, improvised weaponry, and assuming that nature's most resilient insects can be outgunned with holiday leftovers. 3. Electricity is invisible, quiet, and absolutely merciless to people who think physics can be negotiated with hardware store gear and confidence. Our guy decided he'd found a loophole in the system. And by system, I mean both the utility company and the laws of electromagnetism. Behind a row of workshops on the edge of an industrial district, he noticed a service alley with a fat, humming main line feeding the neighborhood. The plan was as elegant as it was illegal. Clamp on a pirated lead, run it to his workspace, and enjoy free power for welders, lights, and a portable AC. He did his research, if you count watching 2 shaky phone videos and skimming a forum thread where the top comment was, "Don't." He equipped himself like a bargain bin lineman, rubber boots from a farm supply store, a pair of bright orange household pliers, and a roll of electrical tape that promised industrial strength in a font loud enough to make you believe it. For altitude, he borrowed an aluminum ladder, because if you're going to gamble with voltage, you might as well do it on a nice, shiny conductor. He waited until dusk when the alley was quiet, then propped the ladder against the pole, tested the boots with a few dramatic stomps, and climbed toward the buzzing spaghetti of cables. Up close, the main line didn't look friendly. It radiated that faint metallic crackle that says, "Your next decision matters." He convinced himself he was safe because, rubber boots, bro. The flaw in the logic could be seen from space. His body wasn't the only possible path to ground. The ladder itself was a gleaming, continuous highway for electrons, and his sweaty hands were exit ramps. He pulled a length of insulated wire from his backpack, stripped it with his pliers, and reached toward the sheath of the live conductor. The trick, he'd decided, was to nick the insulation and clip on fast. No arcs, no sparks, in and out like a ghost. But high voltage loves air. It will jump gaps you don't think exist, especially when humidity is high and your tool has sharp edges that concentrate the electric field. He brought the pliers close, the metal jaws watched by a trillion impatient electrons, and the line answered with a sound like ripping fabric, then a blinding white snap. The arc leapt, found the pliers, raced through his arms and went shopping for exits, down the ladder rails, across the damp pole hardware, into everything metal within reach. His muscles clenched, a full-body nope he didn't authorize, and the sudden current turned his ladder into a tuning fork, humming against the pole. He tried to let go. Unfortunately, electric current doesn't negotiate with your grip. It locks you in. The wire whipped like a live snake. The pliers became a tiny sun, and the air filled with the smell of ozone and hot dust. A neighbor, hearing the crack and seeing the flash, hit the breaker to his own shop out of reflex, but the main stayed very much alive because that's how mains work. By the time someone reached the alley and shouted for help, the line was calm again, humming like nothing had happened, the ultimate poker face. Inspectors later pointed to a small crescent bite in the insulation, evidence of that first flirt with the conductor, and to the ladder's scorched feet, neatly branded where the current decided to finish its trip. The rubber boots? They did their job in the most technical, useless sense possible. His soles likely weren't the primary path to ground. Everything else was. If there's a moral here, it's this. Electricity doesn't care about your hacks, your courage, or your coupon boots. It cares about potential difference, path, and opportunity. He offered all three, gift-wrapped in aluminum and overconfidence, and got the only free power the grid ever gives back. One brutal, unforgettable demonstration that the bill always comes due. 4. The Cornistador. All right, pull up a chair, because this next one takes us deep into America's breadbasket, specifically a sun-baked farm in Nebraska. Our main character, let's call him Dale, wasn't just a farmer. He was the king of his own golden kingdom of corn. Dale was a third-generation farmer, a man whose hands were tougher than shoe leather and who believed that the solution to any problem involved either more horsepower or more stubbornness. He'd seen it all: droughts, floods, locusts, you name it. But one sweltering afternoon, he faced a new enemy, a silent, stubborn foe, his own grain silo. A massive blockage, what they call a corn bridge, had formed inside. Picture a solid crust of corn kernels, 10 feet thick, suspended over a giant pocket of air inside the silo. The grain wasn't flowing. The truck driver he was paying by the hour was getting impatient, and a dark, angry-looking storm was brewing on the horizon. Dale was losing time and money with every tick of the clock. Now, a person with a healthy respect for physics, or perhaps just a basic survival instinct, would see a multi-ton unstable blockage inside a giant metal tube and think, nope. They might call a specialist company that deals with this exact problem. But Dale saw it as a personal challenge. He was the master of this corn, not the other way around. After failing to dislodge it by beating the side of the silo with a hammer until it rang like the world's saddest bell, he hatched a plan. It was a plan born of pure, unadulterated, I got this energy. He decided the most efficient way to break the bridge was to climb in and stomp on it. You heard me. He was going to walk on a suspended ceiling made of loose corn to save a few bucks and beat the rain. Ignoring the dozen bright yellow warning signs plastered all over the silo, signs that basically scream, "You will end your existence in here," he scaled the ladder. With the wind picking up, he popped the top hatch and peered into the dusty golden chasm. It looked solid enough, like a strange, bumpy desert landscape. He probably thought, what's the worst that could happen? Which, as we all know, are the most famous last words in the Darwin Awards lexicon. He lowered himself in, his boots sinking an inch or two into the kernels. It felt firm. He took a confident step, then another. He might have even chuckled to himself, feeling like a genius conquering nature. But corn is not nature, and it is definitely not a structural building material. With his third step, a deep, groaning crack echoed in the steel cylinder. The solid ground beneath him didn't just break, it liquefied. In an instant, the bridge shattered, and Dale was plunged into a nightmare. It wasn't like falling into water, it was like being grabbed by 1,000 hands and dragged down. The grain acted like quicksand, a swirling, suffocating vortex of his own harvest. The immense pressure of the corn would have made it impossible to move, to even scream. He went from being the owner of the corn to an unlisted ingredient in under 3 seconds. When the storm passed and the family realized Dale was missing, the search party's eyes fell on the silo. The grim task of emptying it, kernel by kernel, revealed the tragic finale. Dale had succeeded in breaking the blockage, all right. He'd used the one tool not recommended by any safety manual, himself. He became one with his work in the most literal way possible. A story passed down to remind every farmer that sometimes the most expensive solution is trying to do it for free. 5. A cheesy end to a beef. Okay, now let's travel to a place where ambition and intellect go to die. A dingy apartment in Pennsylvania on a Friday night. The air hangs heavy with the scent of stale beer and the glow of a paused video game. Here we find our two protagonists, Derek and his best frenemy, Kevin. Their friendship was less about camaraderie and more about a lifelong, undeclared Olympics of bad ideas. The event for this evening? The last slice. On the coffee table sat a greasy pizza box, a battlefield containing a single, solitary slice of pepperoni pizza. It wasn't just any slice, it was the alpha slice, the final boss of the pizza box. And both men laid claim to it. The argument started innocently enough, but quickly spiraled into a deeply personal and profoundly stupid debate about honor, contribution, and who was, fundamentally, more of a man. It was a duel of egos where the prize was about $2 worth of dough and cheese. As their voices got louder, their arguments got weaker. Logic had long since clocked out for the weekend. Desperate to land the finishing blow and claim his prize, Derek's eyes darted around the room for a weapon, a prop for his grand declaration of toughness. He bypassed the empty beer bottles and the overflowing ashtray. His gaze landed on the holy grail of bachelor pad snacks, a can of aerosol cheese, that fluorescent orange cheese-adjacent goop. A lightning bolt of pure, unadulterated idiocy struck him. This, he thought, would be his checkmate. He grabbed the can, shook it with ceremonial importance, and locked eyes with Kevin. With the bravado of a matador facing a bull, he declared, "You think you're tough? Watch this." He then put the plastic nozzle into his mouth, tilted his head back, and depressed the button. A thick, hissing stream of orange foam erupted down his gullet. It wasn't a joke. It was a full-throated commitment. He pulled the can away, a triumphant, cheesy foam mustache on his lips, and gasped out a challenge for Kevin to do the same. But the victory celebration was tragically and immediately cut short. Here's a little science lesson Derek skipped. The cheese in the can isn't the dangerous part. The danger is the propellant gas, butane, propane, nitrous oxide, that forces the goo out. When Derek sprayed that concoction directly into his airway, he wasn't just having a snack, he was performing a science experiment on himself. The gas instantly displaced every last molecule of oxygen in his lungs. It's not like choking, where you can't get air in. It's worse. He had filled the only available space with something that wasn't air. The triumphant look on his face melted into pure, silent panic. His eyes went wide. He tried to cough, but only a pathetic, cheesy bubble emerged. He clawed at his throat, his body not understanding why the command to breathe was returning a fatal error message. Kevin just stared, mouth agape, as his friend, the self-proclaimed champion of toughness, crumpled to the floor, turning a disturbing shade of blue. Derek had won the argument. He had proven he was willing to do what Kevin wouldn't. He also permanently retired from all future competitions. Paramedics arrived to a scene that defied explanation, leaving Kevin to stare at the now cold, lonely slice of pizza, the monument to the dumbest duel in history. 6. The lung scrubber. Let's dive into the bizarre world of internet life hacks, where the advice is free and the consequences can be fatal. Our next winner, we'll call him Gary, was a man on a mission. He wasn't just aiming for healthy, he was aiming for sterile. He believed his body was a temple, but a temple that needed a good, aggressive pressure washing from the inside out. After falling down a rabbit hole of online forums where medical degrees are seemingly optional, he found his holy grail, a deep lung cleanse. The theory, as proposed by some anonymous keyboard warrior named Wellness Warrior 420, was simple and profoundly stupid. If bleach can kill germs on your countertop, why not in your lungs? Gary, seeing flawless logic where there was none, decided to put this theory to the test, but he wasn't going to do it halfway. Oh no. To maximize the purifying effects, he devised a plan. He took a gallon of industrial-strength bleach, marched into his smallest bathroom, a tiny, windowless room, and firmly shut the door. He even wedged a towel underneath it to make sure none of the healing vapors could escape. He was creating a DIY wellness sauna, a personal steam room of sterilization. He poured the bleach into a large pot, put it on a portable electric burner he'd brought in, and cranked it up to high. As the liquid began to simmer and then boil, potent, chemical-smelling steam filled the tiny room. This was it, the moment of purification. With a deep sense of accomplishment, Gary leaned directly over the boiling pot, ready to inhale his way to pristine health. He took a long, deep, confident breath. What he inhaled wasn't the gentle vapor of wellness he expected. He inhaled pure, weaponized chlorine gas. The boiling bleach had undergone a chemical reaction, releasing its most toxic form directly into his face. The effect was instantaneous and horrific. Instead of a gentle cleanse, it was like swallowing a lit blowtorch. The chlorine gas immediately began dissolving the soft, delicate tissues of his esophagus and lungs, causing severe chemical burns from the inside out. His body's reaction was violent and absolute. He couldn't scream. His airway was already ravaged. In his quest for ultimate internal cleanliness, Gary had successfully scoured himself right out of the gene pool. The paramedics who found him were met with a scene straight out of a bizarre horror movie. He had achieved a level of cleanliness that was, to put it mildly, incompatible with life itself, proving that some life hacks should really come with a user beware of death label. 7. The Arctic Architect. Up next, we travel to the Great White North, Canada, where the snow is deep and the ideas are sometimes even deeper in stupidity. Meet our guy, let's call him Doug. Doug was a man of action, a man of efficiency. He looked at traditional methods and thought, there has to be a faster, louder way to do this. His project for the day, building a classic igloo in his backyard. It was a beautiful, crisp winter day, the kind you see on a postcard. But Doug found the traditional method of slowly cutting and placing snow blocks to be, frankly, boring and inefficient. A snow knife? That's for amateurs. Doug had a better idea, a modern solution for an ancient problem. He walked into his garage and emerged moments later with his trusty chainsaw. To Doug, this was a stroke of genius. Why spend hours meticulously carving blocks when you could rip through the packed snow with the power of a two-stroke engine? The serene winter silence was promptly shattered by the deafening roar of the chainsaw as Doug went to work. And you know what? It was working. He was slicing through the snow with incredible speed, creating perfect uniform blocks. He was probably feeling pretty smug, like a pioneer of Arctic engineering, picturing the moment he'd crack open a cold beer inside his masterpiece, built in record time. He was so caught up in his own brilliance, so focused on the screaming machine in his hands, that he overlooked one tiny fundamental fact about Canadian winters. Ice is slippery. As he moved to cut his next block, his boot hit a patch of slick ice hidden under the fresh powder. In a split second of pure slapstick comedy, his feet went out from under him. But here's the thing about falling. It's usually not fatal. It is, however, a very bad idea when you're juggling a running, high-powered cutting tool. As Doug went down, the chainsaw, still roaring at full throttle, flew out of his hands. For a moment, it hung in the air, a silver angel of death, before gravity did its thing. The very tool he had chosen to conquer the elements with brutal efficiency turned on its master with that exact same efficiency. He had wanted to speed up the process of building his winter shelter, and in a way, he succeeded. He dramatically sped up the process of needing a very different, much more permanent wooden box. His grand project was cut short, quite literally, proving that sometimes the old slow way is the one that lets you live to see another day. 8. The 4D Gamer. Alright, let's jack into the Matrix for this next one, but a version of the Matrix built in a living room with a leaky budget. We're in South Korea, home to some of the most dedicated gamers on the planet. Our protagonist, a young man we'll call Min Jun, was one of them. But Min Jun wasn't just a gamer. He considered himself a digital method actor, a pioneer of sensory immersion. His obsession was a hyper-realistic naval warfare game, and for him, the gap between the screen and his senses was an insult to the art form. He wanted to feel the ocean's spray as his battleship cut through the waves, to feel the rumble of the cannons in his very bones. So, he embarked on a project to create the ultimate gaming experience, a DIY 4D simulator. His master plan started with a trip to the store where he, a grown man, purchased a bright blue inflatable kiddie pool adorned with cheerful cartoon dolphins. He then set up this vessel in the center of his living room, creating a pathetic but earnest personal ocean. The next step was the most crucial and the most idiotic. He meticulously arranged his entire high-end gaming setup, the glowing tower PC, the ultra-wide monitor, the speakers, in a semicircle around the pool. The entire rig was powered by a tangled nest of extension cords and cheap power strips that snaked across the floor like electric eels waiting for their moment. With everything in place, he filled the pool with water, donned a captain's hat he bought for the occasion, and took his seat in the middle of his aquatic throne. And for a while, it was pure bliss. He was no longer in his cramped apartment. He He was Captain Minjun, master of the digital seas. He splashed his hands in the water to simulate cannon fire. He leaned dramatically into turns, shouting commands at his virtual crew. The immersion was total. During a particularly frantic online battle, with his fleet on the verge of victory, his excitement reached a fever pitch. As he fired the winning torpedo, he threw his hands up in a triumphant roar and slammed them down into the water, sending a glorious arc of water flying through the air. It was a beautiful, slow-motion ballet of stupidity. That celebratory splash landed with perfect accuracy on a dusty, overloaded power strip. The laws of physics, which Minjun had so casually ignored, delivered their verdict instantly. A lethal surge of 220 volts shot through the water, turning his immersive paradise into a conductor's baton for the Grim Reaper. The game on his screen played on, his ship sailing victorious into the sunset. But for Captain Minjun, it was a permanent, system-wide crash. His quest for immersion ended with the ultimate disconnect from reality, proving that the only thing he successfully simulated was his own electrocution. 9. The Candyman can't. Next, we take a trip to a place that every child dreams of, but for one man, became the setting for a sticky, surreal nightmare, a candy factory. Our hero for this tale is a guy named Barry, a factory worker whose life was a monotonous loop of conveyor belts and sugary smells. Barry's one escape from this tedium was his brand new smartphone, a sleek, expensive device that was his pride and joy. It was his portal to the outside world, his status symbol, and the most valuable thing he owned. One fateful afternoon, while walking along a catwalk overlooking the factory floor, he was distractedly scrolling through his phone. He walked past a massive open vat of molten chocolate, a churning, bubbling 5-foot-deep cauldron of sweet, liquid doom. In a moment of pure clumsiness, the phone slipped from his buttery fingers. He watched in slow-motion horror as his precious device tumbled through the air and disappeared with a soft plop into the thick brown abyss. The rational human response would be to hang his head in shame, report the contamination to his supervisor, and accept the consequences. The factory would have protocols for this. But Barry's brain wasn't processing rationally. It was a swirling vortex of panic. He imagined the paperwork, the lecture from his boss, the soul-crushing cost of a replacement phone. In that moment, he decided to launch a covert one-man rescue operation. His chosen tool for this delicate extraction? A flimsy wire coat hanger he snagged from a locker. He scurried to the edge of the enormous vat, the hot, cloying steam billowing into his face. He bent the hanger into a pathetic-looking hook and began his mission. Balancing precariously on the narrow, slippery rim, he leaned far over the bubbling chocolate, probing blindly into the depths like a desperate fisherman. He was stretched out, a perfect picture of terrible decision-making, his eyes fixated on the vat surface. But the combination of a slippery, narrow ledge and a top-heavy, leaning posture is a recipe for disaster. His foot slipped. For a split second, he windmilled his arms, trying to regain his balance, but it was no use. He tipped forward and fell headfirst into the vat. The thick, viscous liquid, much heavier and hotter than water, made swimming impossible. It was like falling into hot liquid tar. Barry's desperate attempt to save a replaceable gadget ended with him becoming a secret, unsanctioned ingredient. He achieved a bizarre form of immortality, a cautionary tale whispered among factory workers about the man who died a death so sweet, it was stupid. 10. The Plumbers Volcano. For our grand finale, we journey to a quiet suburb in Ohio, to the kitchen of a man named Frank. Frank was a fierce believer in the DIY spirit. To him, hiring a professional for a home repair was a sign of weakness, a surrender. He saw plumbers, electricians, and handymen as con artists, and he was determined to solve his own problems with pure grit and a trip to the hardware store. His nemesis on this particular day was a stubbornly clogged kitchen sink. This wasn't just a slow drain. It was a complete blockade, a fortress of grease and forgotten food scraps that had declared war on his plumbing. Frank accepted the challenge. He marched to his garage, which looked less like a workshop and more like a mad scientist's laboratory, and gathered his chemical arsenal. He wasn't going to use a single drain cleaner. he was going to create a super weapon. Into the drain went a heavy pour of crystal lye, a substance capable of dissolving almost anything. He followed that with a generous glug of sulfuric acid-based clog remover. Then, for the finishing touch, he added a splash of ammonia, because in his mind, more chemicals equaled more power. He had just mixed a cocktail of highly reactive agents that any high school chemistry teacher would tell you is a bomb in a bottle. Standing back, he heard a satisfyingly violent fizzing and gurgling from deep within the pipes. He folded his arms, a smug look on his face. "That'll teach it," he likely muttered. But Frank was not a patient man. He needed instant gratification. He had to witness his victory. So, in a move that sealed his fate, he got down on his hands and knees, placed his face directly over the drain opening, and peered into the darkness, hoping to catch a glimpse of the dissolving clog. At that precise moment, his chemical apocalypse reached its peak. The reaction wasn't a gentle clearing. It was a violent, explosive eruption. A geyser of boiling, caustic sludge shot out of the drain with the force of a small volcano, directly into his inquisitive face. His desire to watch his experiment succeed turned him into the experiment itself. Frank's DIY plumbing project ended up costing him significantly more than a plumber's fee, leaving behind a pristine drain and a powerful lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous tool in the house is the person who refuses to read the warning label. So here's the real question nobody wants to ask. Which person in tonight's lineup was the least stupid? Seriously, I want you to go down to the comments and defend one of these Darwin Award winners. Argue why their specific brand of dumb was slightly more logical than the others. Go on, I'll wait. If this beautiful chaos made you feel like a genius, destroy that like button and subscribe.